We worked to create a very diverse panel in terms of backgrounds and career experience. And so I hope that for our students here today, you'll find a little bit of yourself in maybe one or more of our speakers as you navigate your own career paths. With that, I will briefly introduce everybody just so you know who we have here, and then I'll start with our first question. So I'll just say our speakers' names and their title, and then give us a quick wave, and then I'll turn it over to start our first question. Okay, so we have Danielle Rivera. Danielle is a licensed clinical social worker with the LA County Department of Children and Family Services. Just today, starting a brand new promotion within the department, and we're thrilled to have her. Danielle is also a Bruin, graduated with her MSW. We have Dr. Stacy Barron, a medical director and pediatrician for the LA County Department of Children and Family Services. Dr. Barron is also a UCLA Bruin, having completed her pediatric residency at UCLA. We also have Dr. Sophie Day Figueredo. Sophie, I'm sorry if I got it wrong. Sophie is the Senior Clinical Training Manager for the DMH UCLA Prevention Center of Excellence. She holds her PsyD and also is a therapist in private practice. Sophie Day Figueredo. We have Rachel Ewing, JD. She's the firm director with Los Angeles Dependency Lawyers, which is the Parents Council representing parents in the LA County child welfare system. Rachel is also a Bruin, having graduated with her JD from UCLA, and a proud 8 clapper in her emails to me, which I love. We also have Michelle Talley joining us from the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs, where she is on the field education faculty in social welfare. And Michelle is also a UCLA Bruin, having graduated with her MSW from UCLA. Thank you, Michelle, for being with us. Lastly, we have Dean Conklin, JD, resource and training attorney for the Children's Law Center of California, a good friend who I've known, I think maybe the longest out of everybody here. Dean was an intern at Alliance for Children's Rights when I worked there. So happy to have him be a part of our panel today. Thank you, Dean. That is our amazing panel. Let's give them a warm welcome, everybody, for being with us today. And with that, I'm going to ask our first question, which is, panelists, please tell us about your career path to the job that you have now. And one more thing, students, we're going to end today by about 2:45, and we're going to leave time for questions from all of you at the end, but let's allow this to be a conversation. So if anybody has questions, things you want to raise as our speakers share, please feel free to just take yourself off of mute, take yourself out of mute jail, and, chat. Okay, so we'll make this conversational. So let's again go back to our first question. Tell us about the career path to the job you have now. And let's start with Dean. He's top of my Zoom screen.
Sure. I just want to say thanks, Taylor, for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. And hello to everyone, all the other panelists. My career path, it really kind of depends on where you start, but I'll shorten the story a little bit so that we make sure that there's time. I basically was in a master's program in sociology after my undergrad and taking some time off, and I was studying race, class, and gender inequality in our public school systems. And I was really focused on data and research methodology and really how to figure out the problem. And it just felt too distant to me from the solution. And so I decided to kind of shift gears and look less at social research and more at social justice. And that led me to law school. I went to Loyola Law School knowing that I wanted to do public interest. I had the background in education, so I figured that would be kind of a natural path for me. Through there, I had internships at mental health advocacy services and the Alliance for Children's Rights and Public Counsel. All three are just excellent organizations that really enhanced my understanding of kind of what kind of law I wanted to practice, what I wanted to do. I was a clinical law student in Loyola's Youth Justice Education Clinic as well, which again was just so seminal in terms of gaining the skills and understanding kind of the path forward and further kind of creating a target for what I wanted to do. I was really fortunate to have a fellowship out of law school with Learning Rights Law Center, another great organization. It's a little smaller than the other ones I've named, where I focused on the intersection of education rights and mental health services for foster youth. And there's actually provisions in the Ed Code that mandate that different mental health services are provided through a child's education provider. And through there, again, I started working with attorneys at Children's Law Center who were even closer to the source and doing work, really providing a direct service. And I just felt like this is where I want to be. I feel like when we look at public interest law, there are so many people who find themselves really drawn to direct service. And that was just something that I knew I wanted to do. And so I joined CLC 5 years ago and was a case carrying staff attorney for 3 of those, and have been lucky enough to be in our administrative office for the last 2, where I've worked with Sue Abrams, who I think presented a few days ago on policy. So that's where I am now. And it's been a great journey. And I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Dean. Let's go to Michelle Talley, please.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And so glad I was able to step in. So my career path was not a straight linear progression. Initially, I'll start from graduate school. So initially I received my MSW, and also in addition to that received the Castlewood Stipend. I do see some UCLA MSW students here on the call, but basically it's a stipend that trains and provides support to begin a career at LA County Dcfs. So my start of my career, I worked at LA County Dcfs as an adoption social worker for a little over 3.5 years. Really fell in love with it. Really enjoyed working with the families. And then shortly after my 3.5 years, I then began working in a residential treatment program that continued on the progression of working with children and families that weren't able to remain in the homes. And the children were in a residential program, which is not necessarily the case anymore. And so I was the clinician working with 6 to 9-year-old boys, which taught me a lot about myself, taught me a lot about the role of a professional social worker. The next chapter of my life, that's where I thought I was going to be. I was just going to be a clinical supervisor, run my own private practice, and really fell in love with it. Just a quick funny story is one of my colleagues saw the position as of the field education faculty and thought that I would be a good fit. And because I also am very competitive, I had a little competitive spirit. So I decided to apply just to prove that he was wrong. But actually I was wrong. And I ended up with the position and working as a field education faculty. Did not know that my niche of teaching and training was something that I would love and enjoy. But I've been working in that arena for 17 years. I still collaborate, and still haven't left DCFS. I'm the DCFS project coordinator, so I collaboratively work with DCFS, providing training, work in the stipend program, and coordinate with students who are interested in a career or starting their career off, as I did, in public child welfare. Very quickly, in addition to that, I never wanted to leave practice. Although I love working with students and community-based agencies, providing training and developing curriculum, but I never wanted to leave working with children and families. So I work on a per diem basis at Santa Monica, UCLA as a medical social worker, which I touch almost every discipline, including child welfare in my career. So that's a little bit about my career path. So glad you all are here.
Super cool, Michelle. Love that involvement with the hospital too. Such a great example of the ways in which, you know, social workers can work in a medical setting if that's an area of interest. Thank you. Let's go to Rachel, please.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Taylor, for having me and having Ladle. My career started, I don't know. I think when I was actually in high school, if you can believe that, I started thinking about doing this work because I knew I wanted to work with children. I had some close friends, and we had decided that we were going to have this practice in which there was medical and there was psychology, and that we would all be focused on working with children. As it turned out, two of my friends ended up in pediatrics. I started out in psychology, but when I was in school, I realized that I needed to do more. I was strongly influenced by professors that I had there who were activists and who kept talking about change and, you know, being part of that change. So I decided that I would go to law school. I knew when I went into law school that I wanted to do criminal. My dad worked in the DA's office. He was a supervising investigator. So every day when we would ride together, I would get regaled with these stories about people's lives and crime. And I was really listening to him. And I thought that I would join the DA's office. When I first started in the DA's office, I was in the executive offices. And so I unfortunately had a very skewed view of the DA's office. The people that I was working with in the executive offices were very idealistic and forward thinking, and I was really excited to work there. They let me do things like establish a program, a diversity program for law students so that they could take advantage of the opportunities that the DA's office had to offer. And they were very much involved in that. But unfortunately, after that, when I joined the rank and file, it became very clear to me that we had quite a philosophical divide, and that I really should have probably been in the PD's office. So I did join the PD's office. And I was a public defender for a number of years. I loved it, great job. I can't recommend it more highly, especially if you feel like, you know, you want to wage war and you're a defender, and that's absolutely how I view myself. So it was a perfect fit. However, going through a divorce and all that kind of stuff didn't quite fit with me at that time. So I left and I went to the Children's Law Center, and I felt like I was coming full circle because I was back with the kids again, but more importantly, I was back with the families. And I did that for a number of years, and then I became a panel attorney. For the first part of my panel career, I continued representing children, mostly adolescents, in delinquency. And then I found myself at Ladle. And I have been here ever since, and have really never looked back. I never felt any conflict or any pull in what I was doing before and what I'm doing now, because it was all the same people. It was all the same families. It was everybody, you know, really pushing for the same thing, which was for the children to be back at home and for their parents to reunite with their children.
Hi guys, sorry about that. My mute button. Rachel, thank you. Love your career path and all of the little twists it has taken. And I think if we get a chance, would also love to hear maybe on our next couple of questions about the work that you've been spearheading around equity for children and families at Ladle and leading so beautifully. Let's pop to Stacy Barron, Dr. Barron.
Great. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Taylor, so much for inviting me to this. It's also so nice to hear about Dean and Rachel and Michelle. And I look forward to hearing about Danielle and Sophie as well. I am Stacy Barron. I am the newish medical director at the Department of Children and Family Services. So I started in this role just about 3 months ago. I presented on this panel last year as the pediatrician at all of you UCLA Medical Center, where I still do see patients in clinic. And so I think there's another question where I get to tell you about my day, which I can share with you about my new day and my old days. But my path here is I hear like tenets from others' stories as well in my own, but so I grew up, I was fortunate to have my mom and dad who are very passionate about their careers. My mom is an English teacher and my dad is in public health. And so, you know, they would always come to the table with stories about their work and that passion. And I think that really had motivated me to pursue something that I didn't know what I wanted to do, but something that I was passionate about and something that was not just a job. I really liked the health sciences in middle school and in high school and had thought about medicine a little bit even as early as high school. I went to college at Emory University in Atlanta, which is right on the same campus as the CDC. So had a lot of sort of health influence there and, you know, was sort of toying around with public health versus medicine, even as an undergrad. I had always been really fascinated with biology and physiology. I had some experiences in Atlanta that I think really solidified my decision to go to medical school over public health. I was did some volunteer work at one of the hospitals in Atlanta and then actually also volunteered at this program that took care of medically complex children who were dependents of the court in Georgia. And so really now sort of coming full circle, but I will tell you, even though I have that sort of like connection back in college, I would never have imagined that this is where I would be now. And I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. And so I think I'm in my story right now, and where that story will go has many different options. But just to put that out there, keeping your mind open. But I had, you know, I went back home to my home state after college for medical school. I went to Temple University School of Medicine in Philadelphia, which was a very collaborative and really supportive medical school learning environment. It was an environment that was, and I say this because sometimes this is not the case of folks who go to medical school, but it's a very collaborative and not competitive environment, which I think just fostered learning to the extent that you want to learn and to what you're passionate about. And I think I always knew I have very poor spatial skills, and so no one would ever want me to be their surgeon. And I do limited procedures in pediatrics, very good with the lumbar punctures because there's just one spot there. But I knew that I was probably best for a non-surgical field. And I had always kind of thought about pediatrics, but really kept an open mind until right to the decision time, and really felt that peds was kind of the perfect combination of my you know, the sort of ingrained genetic love of teaching that I had from my mom, and that ability to sort of communicate with parents who are quite worried about their child's medical condition, and also to advocate for people who can't necessarily speak or advocate for themselves. And then also just the multidisciplinary nature of medicine. I think, you know, the other thing that really kind of inspired me too was just paying attention to what I like to read about for fun. And I love reading about all things medicine, peds, child welfare, and I think as you think about different careers, like thinking about what interests you and what you like to read about, in your spare time, though there's also very importance to getting out of work. I then came to Los Angeles County for my residency program. I couples matched with an ex-husband, so divorced. And I say that because we're also all humans and people, and life happens. And so we'll weave that into my story as it works. But I, also wanted to make sure that I would thrive in LA County too, on my own. And I fell in love with All of You Medical Center, which is where I actually had my continuity clinic as a resident, which was in 2012. I started there. And so recently I just saw a 21-year-old who I had as a patient when he was 12, which is crazy. It doesn't feel like that long ago I was in your shoes. And so All of You has one of the special clinics that serves children and families that are part of Department of Children and Family Services. And so I had more experience, I think, with DCFS through having my clinic there, and just became very interested in the intersectionality of medical, legal, social work. Back in October, I was sitting at my desk in my clinic and I said, my dream job would one day to be a medical director at DCFS. And my boss said, well, they need somebody now because it's COVID and we really need medical director. So I had the opportunity to be an acting medical director for a few months last fall. And in the meantime, also applied for the position to be the full-time medical director, and found out while I was on maternity leave with my daughter this past spring that I was accepted to the position. So I just started this, and I think that's the beginning of this journey. And yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Stacy. It's so great to hear you talk about like what you like to read, because I know you'll send me podcasts of things that you're listening to on your spare time, and they're all aligned with work and with kids and families. And so it's really cool to hear you suggest that to the students as well. Let's go to Danielle.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you guys are having a good day. I'll start with, I didn't think I was going to be a social worker, so we'll start there. I went to UCLA for undergrad. I started as a business econ major, realized I didn't like it, and so started exploring, and psychology just kind of stood out. So I switched my major to psychology and did a minor in education, and through some internships and different preventive healthcare, outreach, helping kids apply for UCs and CSUs and things of that sort. In one of my internships, there was a presentation from an adoptions DCFS social worker. And it just kind of sounded interesting. So I reached out to her. We had coffee one day and she really just started to explain to me like her job and what she does. And it just kind of started to feel like the right fit. She's also the one that told me about the stipends that DCFS offers and the state of California with a guaranteed job. So it just sounded enticing. And so I applied for my MSW. I also applied for the stipend and I got I don't know what it's called now these days, because it was IUC back then. And I also was able, because I was lucky back then that I was able to do my DCFS internship my first year, which allowed me to get my PPS, to do my hours for my PPSC my second year, to be able to, if I wanted to, work in school and do school social work. So I had the different options that I was lucky enough to have when I finished grad school. I did have the commitment to DCFS. Initially, I was going to do my year or two and then just kind of see what else. And 10 years, almost 10 years later, I won't say 10 years just yet. Here I am still at DCFS. I started as an emergency response worker, did that for about 3.5 years. So that front line, going to the doors, being that first person to knock and see if there's any truth to the allegations that were brought to our attention. From there, I transitioned to working in continuing services, where we were working with the families to hopefully successfully help them exit our system in whatever combination or form that took. And then from there, promoted to a supervisor. And for the last 4 years, I was supervising workers who worked with the families who had open cases with the department. Alongside with that, over the last couple of years, I did get my license, so I'm an LCSW. I also provide supervision to others who are seeking to get licensed and credentialed as well. I also have had interns for the last 7-8 years at DCFS. I also do a lot of community partnering in the world of domestic violence. I co-lead a community forum in the San Fernando Valley where different agencies come together to address the different needs in the world of domestic violence. I also co-facilitated our Young Children in Care team in our office and really focusing on the importance of healthy development in young children because there's a huge correlation and need for kids who are enter our system before the age of 5 and ending up being in long-term care in our system. So what's happening and what's going on with the little ones that they end up lingering, being moved from placements more often. So the county is really trying to explore and take a deeper look at what's happening in the development of these kids and the attachment. And just today, I did start a new position. I'm now a Children's Service Administrator with the Continuous Quality Improvement Division. My role is still being defined as we go. So I'm just learning, but we're really focusing and working with the state and other county agencies to improve case management. Where are areas of improvement and how do we present that and share that with not only DCFS, but our county partners.
Thank you so much, Danielle. And I always fail to mention your double Bruin, two degrees from UCLA. My apologies. So happy to mention that though. Very cool. Thank you. And thanks for being with us on your first day of your new job. Okay, let's go to Sophie.
Thank you, Taylor, and hi, everybody. Nice to see the panelists from last year as well. My name's Sophie. I'm a psychologist, and my current role at UCLA is a senior clinical training manager in this kind of unique little program called the DMH UCLA Prevention Center of Excellence. And that's a partnership between LA County and UCLA to disseminate information and trainings around trauma and resiliency informed care, so that we can kind of prevent potential re-traumatization of youth and LA County constituents. And I'll tell you how I got here in just a second, but I think I forgot to say that last year. So I wanted to make sure to say it up front. But my path really starts with the fact that as a kid, I moved around a ton, different countries, different cities. And I think that really sparked a passion for getting to know people and cultures and understanding people in context, and also really the importance of relationships and maintaining relationships with people and how transformative they can be. I was exposed to psychology sort of properly in high school, really liked it, was kind of set on med school. And I feel like psychology just sort of kept knocking at my door saying like consider me too. Throughout my experiences in college, I double majored at Boston College with English and psychology, did all sorts of things like research in a rat lab. I worked on some clinical trials, with youth for psychopharmacology. So trying to understand whether medications were safe for use for youth with diagnosed bipolar disorder and ADHD. That was really interesting, but I really wanted to be able to hear people's stories more often, right? And not just kind of only look at symptoms and things like that. And it led me to apply for a doctorate in psychology and specifically a PsyD. And, so a PhD is a doctor of philosophy of psychology and a PsyD is a doctor of psychology. You can also do research with a PsyD, but really the training is more heavily focused on clinical work. And that's really what having done research in the past, I knew I really wanted to just get really, really good at being a good clinician. And so I applied for my PsyD and I went to a program, it's a joint program between Stanford Medical School and the Pacific Graduate School of Psychology. And I loved grad school, as dorky as that is. I got lots of different experiences throughout my clinical training. I got to work at the VA. I got to work in a juvenile hall in a girls kind of rehabilitation program. I got to work in a couple of different community mental health settings. So I got really broad exposure. And, through that really discovered that I love doing trauma work and I love working with teens and young adults. if you had asked me prior to grad school if I would ever be a trauma therapist, I would have said absolutely not. Why would I want to work with all the bad things that happen to people? But what I learned is that you really see how resilient people are and how bad things happen to everybody, right, in different ways, and that we grow and continue on despite it. And it's actually very inspiring. And I just love teenagers and young adults. A lot of people don't like them. I absolutely love them. They're totally my jam. I brought me down to LA because I wanted to specialize in working with teens and young adults. So I did a 2-year specialization program at Children's Hospital LA, where I was up until last year. After my training, I developed a mental health program for young parents there. I was primarily providing clinical services. That clinic was for youth. We didn't see anyone who had private insurance or could, afford private pay. It was just for youth with Medi-Cal, because that was really important to me, to be able to provide quality care to populations that might not be able to access it otherwise. So a lot of first generation, immigrant families like my own. I partnered with programs like Learning Rights, where I know Dean mentioned. I've had to collaborate with Dcfs at different points in time. Certainly, I met Taylor through CHLA, and that was part of what I loved, was just how interdisciplinary that work was. And to be very honest with you all, I got very tired and burnt out from doing full-time clinical care and wanted to think about how to apply my skills in a different way. So the work I do at UCLA is really thinking about kind of systems level work and systems level change, which is really, really interesting. I really miss the interdisciplinary piece of clinical care because I don't get that as much in my private practice. But, lots of different things you can do in psychology.
Super. Thank you so much, Sophie. I likewise love teenagers. And so it's always fun to hear you talk about how much you love teenagers too. Really appreciate that, and as well as everything else that you shared. So before I go on to our next question, I want to ask our students, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to raise at this time? You can chat it, or you can take yourself off mute. Anything? Okay, none. Oh, Brianna. Okay, so can the Dcfs stipend program be explained in more depth? So I feel like Michelle or Danielle could probably address that.
I'll give it to Michelle. And I just want to give a quick shout out. Michelle's my field advisor in grad school. So just quick note.
Everyone's connected.
So good to see you, Danielle. So the Dcfs stipend, specifically, I'll just talk a little bit about it. It's a 1-year stipend. Now, Danielle, only offered in the 2nd year. And it's an $18,500. It's a joint consortium between UCLA as the contract specifically with LA Dcfs, and then they subcontract with the 9, actually 10 universities now throughout the greater Los Angeles County. And because it's a joint collaboration with LA County Dcfs and the 10 other universities, you'll receive an $18,500 training stipend, as well as in your 2nd year, you will intern at LA County Dcfs, specifically after going through this pre-screening process, and LA Dcfs, as well as UCLA and the 9 other universities, USC, Cal State Long Beach. The newest 2 is Cal State Bakersfield, as well as Brandman University in Irvine. And so what we do is we collaboratively work with LA County Dcfs in preparing interns who are interested in a career in public child welfare. In that 1 year you will intern, but you will also receive training and support, and then some of your classes in your graduate program, as well as UCLA doesn't have a BSW program, but some of the other schools have a BSW program, and they will prepare you with that interest or that specialty in public child welfare. So that's a little bit about the LA Dcfs stipend. I also just want to mention the Swag Stipend, I work closely with my colleague Laura Alonji, who is on vacation, and I stepped in her not in her place, but just stepped in for today because I can't replace her. And so the Castlewood Stipend is a 2-year stipend, collaborative. It works collaboratively with the state of California. And so you're provided with a stipend for 2 years, and then either through LA County Dcfs or the neighboring counties, and then you'll provide your payback by working 2 years at either a child welfare agency, or you can also work for the state with some of the state initiatives as well. So that's a little bit more about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Super helpful. And I know we have a number of students interested in the social work path. So it's so great to have you be able to shed light on these outstanding programs that we hope our students can benefit from. If they have more questions about that, I'm assuming there's information on UCLA's MSW page about it.
Yes. So yes, if there's more questions or more information, there it is on UCLA Luskin social welfare website, and you will find my email as well as my colleague Laura Alangi's email. I'm happy to give you some more information. And I know there's a few students who are in this program. I won't call them out, but there's a few students that are in the Castlewood program as well currently.
This is true. Thanks so much, Michelle. Okay, let's go to Sophie. There were 2 chat questions for Sophie. Did you see them, Sophie, or do you want me to read them to you?
I saw them, and I'm happy to answer them. And I'm also happy if folks want to hear more detail, you can email me separately and we can set up a time to chat. But just very broad overview of the program that I went to. It's a program that it's generalist. At the time, there were no opportunities for specializing and working with kids or, kind of special populations. I think now there are, but it's generalist. So I got broad training, which I loved. I thought that was a great foundation. And it's really focused on areas of psychology that are based in evidence. So both from interventions to kind of theory. And I felt like I got a really good range of exposure to lots and lots of different things in psychology. And I continue to supplement with my own training. And again, feel free to email me. I won't get into the specifics because I could go on and on. And in terms of whether it's common for psychologists to have formal employment in a private practice, it's not uncommon. And especially I think if you are in community mental health, because, one of the questions later is one of the misconceptions about your field. And I would have teenagers often say to me like, oh, you're here for the money. And if you're in community mental health, you are not in it for the money. I can tell you that right now. And so it is common to supplement because private practice might be a nice financial supplement, but also they're really good. For me, it was a really good complement. And I see somebody asked about kind of managing burnout and compassion fatigue, and actually working with 2 different groups of people who come to you with different kinds of needs, and diversifying the work that I found to be a really beneficial way to kind of keep myself afloat and keep doing the thing I love. But I cut down. I was 80% at Children's.
Thank you, Sophie. Okay, so Sam asking about boundaries and compassion fatigue. Does anybody on the panel want to speak to that? So the question is, how are you able to compartmentalize and set boundaries to prevent compassion fatigue and take the work home with you when dealing with victims of trauma and child abuse to sustain yourself in the field? Anyone want to speak to that?
I just was going to say something briefly because, that's one of the questions I get a lot as a defense attorney is, how could you represent these monsters and, how do you sleep at night, that type of thing. One of the myths that I did want to dispel, the majority of the cases that come to us are cases of neglect. I have had in my career, actually, very few monsters. I'm not saying that they don't exist because they do, but they've been so few and far between. I think that one of the difficulties for me has mostly been just the frustration of accessing services for families and pushing against those barriers, dealing with the disproportionality that exists in this system. And I think just the fighting it and always staying involved in it and pushing back on it, that somehow keeps me sane, if that makes any sense. And if, I don't mean to be, but feeling righteous in what I'm doing and that we're doing good work for the families. I think that also helps. But I'd be lying to you if I said, we cry about dead babies. We cry when families, are kept apart and kids get adopted, and it's tough. You don't lose your humanity by being in the trenches. You don't want to lose that. You want to feel that.
Thank you, Rachel. So beautifully said. Anyone else? Danielle, do you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo one of the things Rachel said too, and just kind of highlight, like, at the end of the day, it is very far in between that, like, you see what you see on the media. I mean, the reality at the end of the day is that they're human beings, and you stay connected to the end of the day that people make mistakes. We're not perfect. We are extremely imperfect, and we don't have all the answers. We don't know how. Not everyone's born with all the skill sets to be the best parent they possibly can be. And I think if you stay connected and grounded, that these are people that you're dealing with, and the decisions you make can impact the trajectory of this family. It's humbling, and it keeps you centered in that you're here to kind of help them learn better ways to navigate and manage their situations versus I'm labeling you abuser or a neglector of your children. And the department is trying to evolve in that mindset. So there's a transition in terms of that too. The other piece I would say is that social work isn't everything I am. It's a huge part of my identity. It's a lot of what I do, but I have a very healthy, supportive outside life, whether it's through my travels with my partner or my dog. Like, definitely you prevent burnout and compassion fatigue as long as you're taking care of yourself, along with all the things that you experience. And I think people give too much of themselves to a job and forget to take care of yourself along the way.
Thanks, Danielle. Anyone else want to speak to this? And Sophie also put an answer in the chat. So if anyone wants to read that, it's there. Stacey?
And just to echo, Danielle, what you just said, and yes, I enjoy reading about pediatrics and child welfare in my spare time, but I also have, and I get enjoyment out of that. I think, like, making sure that you understand yourself and what fuels you in your spare time is, like, so critically important, and that you have to come to work the most healthy version of yourself, and whatever you need to do to support that. For me, it was running, it was going to therapy myself through much of my training and my professional experience, to be able to talk to somebody and organize my thoughts when I was having a tough time. And I think what I learned is that, in med school, people say, oh, med school is stressful, residency stressful. The people that you're dealing with in these professions have had very stressful times as well. And so life is also going to happen, and we're all going to have some difficult things that go on in our personal lives too throughout our profession. And so just understanding the need to be very present at work, given the line of work, and then making sure to prioritize taking care of myself so that I could be the most present at work was something I realized that when I didn't do that, that I actually wasn't doing my best job at work. And that became how I prioritized taking care of myself. And I think I echo everything that Rachel and Danielle both said. And just, it can be very overwhelming, I think, in this space where you see so many different systems of care that are dysfunctional, and you want to fix them all today. And I have to, write down those ideas or compartmentalize them, put them somewhere, but kind of understanding that you can take a corner of that piece, and you can take your corner of the world, and you can support this family that day in this manner. And while that might not be what your ideal state of the whole system is, that is fueling. And I think if you go into it thinking that you're going to save the world, it's not going to work out. You're going to get very overwhelmed and burnt out very quickly. And so kind of figuring out what your piece of the world is going to be, and that the system needs to have all of us present together to change. It's not just any single one of us, is also something that I carry with me too.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Anyone else? Dean.
I know we want to move on to another question, and Rachel and Danielle hit it right on the head with understanding the humanity of our work. I think another thing to keep in mind is when it comes to management and compassion fatigue is you don't always have to manage it, and you definitely don't have to manage it yourself. Most of the time, people need help when they're doing this work, and they lean on their colleagues and they lean on each other. And a lot of times when you're confronted with something that's just overwhelming, you don't necessarily have to immediately have kind of an approach or a system or a way to fix it. Sometimes you just have to text your supervisor or your court partner and say, I need help right now. I need a break. I need to take the rest of the day. And I know Ladle does that for their staff attorneys. I know that our organization does that for our staff attorneys. It's so important when we talk about compassion fatigue to make sure that you're not just one soldier on the field of this, kind of fighting your own battles, but that you have support and help. And I think that most of the organizations that I've worked with in this field really emphasize the idea that compassion fatigue is not something you just kind of approach alone. It's something we talk about. It's something we support each other with. It's something that it's okay sometimes to say, I think I'm losing this. I need a day off. And it's so instrumental to the success of our organizations to have that woven into our culture and to make sure that support is in there whenever someone needs it.
Thanks, Dean. Anything from Michelle? Or I know Sophie put yours in the chat, but feel free to speak. Take yourself off mute.
I just want to say the one thing in the social work profession, and I definitely agree with everything that everyone has said, but it's very brief. The social work profession, after so many years, has finally added another social work value, which is self-care. So with our social work profession, acknowledging self-care is necessary and crucial to the work that we do. It really speaks volumes to we're moving in the right direction, as well as I can't say that without saying acknowledging athletes who are definitely taking a stand and understanding that in order for us to be our best selves and support others, we need to take care of ourselves first.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Sophie?
I was just going to acknowledge the athletes as well. And I think one of the biggest lessons I had to learn in terms of managing burnout and compassion fatigue is using your sick days, and taking like mental health as seriously as we take every other aspect of health, and learning how to say no, right? Because we're all in this, I think, because we want to help people. We're passionate about what we do. It's easy to want to say yes. There's so much need. There will always be more need than there are resources, right, to support the communities that we all care so much about. And we can't do that if we're not okay. So learning that saying no is an act of kindness and self-care for ourselves and the people that we provide services to. And that was really hard. That was really hard to learn.
Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing and just being so open about your experiences with these issues. Greatly appreciated and very important, because I know for so many of our students, they ask they'll say, I really want to do this work, but I'm afraid that it will be too emotional or it will be too hard. And I always say it is hard and it is emotional, but then we find ways to do it. And that means that you care. And it also means that you can find support as you do it. So thank you for sharing the ways in which you do so. All right, guys, I'm going to go to our second question. Let's talk about, an average work day, maybe before the pandemic, and maybe how it's changed because of the pandemic. Talk about your routine, what you do at the office, maybe some of the ways that you wind down from work. And I'll just let the panel choose the order. And if you don't want to talk about this question because you don't like it, you can skip too. So I'm going to put the question in the chat just as a reminder, and I'll let you guys decide who wants to speak. Everyone's so polite. Oh, Danielle.
I was like, I'll go first. So prior to the pandemic, I mean, as a supervisor, I mean, my role is really a supportive role. It's to be there for my staff, to help them know how to navigate their cases, to talk about fatigue, burnout, setting boundaries, all those things. I mean, it's kind of that gatekeeper between also not only protecting my staff, but like helping them understand and be there for their clients in a way that's present and attuned to what's going on with that family. It included a lot of report reading, meeting for supervision, attending meetings. But even outside of that, I had joined different community groups to address and work on specific issues, as I mentioned in my beginning little speech about early childhood development, as well as domestic violence. So the county is really flexible in that, like, there's a lot of opportunities to engage in different topics or things that are at the forefront of how our practice is evolving. So I definitely took advantage of that to try to give myself or give myself that opportunity to learn about what's going on in those different aspects of the field. And in terms of winding down, I will say that pre and post pandemic, necessarily in terms of our responsibilities, hasn't changed. I think the biggest difference is that we just aren't seeing each other together. And I think that has impacted us in the world of social work, is that we really rely on those social connections and contact. And I think my staff have felt it through the pandemic, and not being able to kind of come together, even if it was just like eating lunch together, having those spaces where we all were processing and bouncing things off together as a team. I tried my best to create those spaces via Zoom or Teams or whatever media or video platform to try to maintain those connections. And there's also, people felt like they can double task. Like, I can be on this call and I'm still responding to emails, right? Like we had some maladaptive behaviors come as a result of the pandemic. And I think for a while we all kind of felt that burnout, and that we were saying yes to too much during the pandemic. I will say, for me personally, I did have a lot of guilt that my workers had to go still into the homes, had to risk getting sick, despite having PPE equipment, really having to process like what those fears were for them, and being that support, and also being willing to at times go with them when they needed that support into the home. So it's been a struggle, and I know it's still ongoing, but it's better with the vaccine and things of that sort. And in terms of winding down at the end of the day, my boyfriend and I definitely make sure we have dinner together. We go on a walk with our dog, and then we have our podcasts or books that we like to listen to. And we definitely take our little weekend getaways to disconnect from our jobs.
Thanks, Danielle. Anyone else want to speak to this question?
Well, I had a much more straightforward workday in some ways in my previous work as a physician, going to clinic and seeing patients. And now I go to clinic once a week. And in the other 4 days, I'm really working with all types of different disciplines. So social work, law, mental health, public health, and collaborating on different system-wide projects and initiatives, and then doing case consultation for different cases that for which I can support the different team members on the medical aspects of the case. And then also crafting what a medical director role is in a child welfare system. And there's not that many of us in the country, and it's something that I really hope to kind of formally put down so that we can create more training and a pipeline for people to do this, and some more interest in it as well. I think so to wind down, and so two things. One is that I just like kind of giving myself grace every day with this new job and learning, and that there's just very, I think self-affirmations are really important. And to wind down, putting technology away is huge for me. And so I put my phone away, I put my computer away, I disconnect for a few hours at night and spend time with my daughter, technology free, because I think that especially with the pandemic, that connectedness specifically to electronics has just become a lot. And so being very mindful about putting that away has been helpful in a deliberate way.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I'm happy to go, and I can also answer Cecilia's question, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, because that is a part of what I do in my current job. The question is about if we provide any trainings to educators, I believe, right? For classroom teachers and principals. And if you look at, I'll put the website in the chat after, but at the Prevention Center of Excellence, what we do is create trainings for different sectors and across the county. And I manage the education sector and specifically work with the LA County Office of Education. And I manage a team of our staff members who create trainings and deliver the trainings to schools in LA County. And if you didn't know, LA County has 81 school districts in it. It's massive. We work with 15 of them through an initiative called the Community Schools Initiative. And it's been really lovely in this new role to get familiar with the education system and sector kind of more broadly, because my work before at Children's was really going to schools with my clients or on behalf of my clients to help advocate for, educational rights and things like that as a clinician. And a lot of the times it was the impact of trauma on, their ability to learn and, kind of giving context to why, some of my clients might be having a hard time at school and getting support for them in the school district. My last job was primarily clinical services, like I said, to teens and young adults. Most of them had experienced trauma. A lot of them had complex chronic medical conditions. And we at our clinic saw a number of youth diagnosed with neurodevelopmental disabilities. And that actually became a real interesting kind of clinical passion of mine over time that I didn't know that I would come to love. And I ran groups, social skills groups. I started a group, kind of an empowerment therapy support group for young women. I worked with teen moms and dads. And I provided supervision for a long time. I kind of already spoke about my current job, and a day and a half a week, I see clients in private practice, and how I unwind a lot of bad TV that doesn't require thinking. I also have a dog, and that's super helpful, and she is super helpful, I should say. And I think the benefit of, working from home this year without having to commute has been that I get to do a little more cooking, just a little bit more, not that much more. And, a little more time for TV, podcasts, walks, things like that, that maybe otherwise would have been harder to get. Hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. Anyone else want to speak to this? The day-to-day.
I think just from an attorney's perspective with the court system, pre-pandemic, our attorneys, we have about 300. And typically their day-to-day, most of them are court-appointed, courtroom assigned staff attorneys. And so we assign our staff attorneys to a particular department or a courtroom here in Monterey Park and in Lancaster. You typically have anywhere from 4 to 6 different CLC attorneys that go to the same department every day. They work with the same counsel from other agencies. That includes Ladle and County Counsel, and there's court staff as well that are also assigned to the courtroom, and then there's a presiding officer. And most of the time you have a sense of what the court calendar is going to be. And if our attorneys have done their job, they have prepared the cases that will be on the calendar. Pre-pandemic would also be a chance to interview clients who are brought to court so that we can get the most up-to-date information, get a sense of really what's going on up to the moment of the hearing. So it can make for a really busy atmosphere, and it can be really exciting in a way in terms of kind of the pace and all that's going on. There's also different pickup days where a new case comes along, and there's definitely rotations or schedules about which attorney is picking up those new cases. That tends to be the morning by and large. In certain courtrooms that might go into the afternoon, some attorneys spend all day in court, but most of our attorneys at some point, either at lunch or just after lunch, go back to the office and start doing the prep work for the next day or the next few days. That might mean calling other counsel in the courtroom and talking through a case, or working on interviewing our clients, or doing some research, or processing the day's files. But it's very fast paced, and it's very much direct service. So that's what most of our attorneys are doing. It involves real lawyer work. We talk about misconceptions. Dependency law is real law. It's a real legal field with the rules of evidence and bench officers and attorneys, and we do trial practice. So when it comes to my position specifically, it changes every day. I work in our administrative office. So for example, right now I have, after this, a meeting with our executive director about some fellowship applicants that we're working on for exciting projects in 2022. I run a post-bar law clerk program for graduates of law school who want to see what dependency is like while they're waiting for bar results. Lots of different projects, but by and large, attorneys at our organization are spending a lot of time in court, and they usually start in court and spend most of the day in court. And when they're not in court, they're getting ready for court the next day.
And Dean and Rachel maybe can also just give a quick blurb on this. In addition to all the lawyers that you work with, I know that both of your firms employ social workers, as well as people with lived experience. In especially CLC's case, they have young people that were in foster care working for them who advocate for the youth. Ladle, I believe, has parents that were involved with the system, now working for them to help advocate. So maybe, again, just highlighting that lived experience, but also that, social workers can work at law firms. I think there's even medical people on at least CLC's staff. So just flagging that.
Yeah, so we have obviously quite a number of attorneys, but we have a staff of over 500, and about 300 of them are attorneys. So there's 200 other support staff and social work investigators and case managers. To break that down a little bit, we definitely have different specializations in CLC. So for example, we have a mental health response team that does employ, we have a doctor on staff, we have a mental health specialist who's an attorney on staff, but so much of our work is through our social work investigators. These are social workers who work for CLC and who go and usually conduct client visits, or they'll go to CFT meetings. They might even go to IEP meetings or different aspects of our clients' lives. One thing we're really working on right now is how our social workers and Ladle social workers can join forces and really look at family strengthening and enhancement there. And so we just had a training yesterday morning where Ladle and CLC social workers, parent partners, peer advocates, transition age youth partners came together and started exploring what is an adversarial system in some ways, but it really shouldn't be if our goal is to strengthen communities, to empower families. The people who are working most directly with both of our clients, the parents and the children, really can find creative ways to enhance the outcomes of the case and make sure that there's help when needed and that help is available. So we also have peer advocates who are former foster youth who have aged out and now are employed by CLC and really work with our transition age youth on different life skills and other questions they might have. We really have worked hard to diversify our roles here at CLC to make sure that we're meeting all of our clients' needs, advocating for the whole client, and now more than ever, seeing this not as a children's rights issue, but as a family strengthening issue.
Thank you, Dean. Anyone else want to speak to this? Or Rachel, do you want to speak to the little nuanced point that Dean just mentioned around Ladle's work in this regard?
I was just going to mention before you had said anything, Taylor, that Yeah, we really have embraced this notion that, you know, this work is holistic, that, you know, we really need to be addressing all of the issues that are challenging for the families. And in my day in particular, you know, I might be working with the social workers on a case trying to get, you know, our client, you know, Medi-Cal. And another case, I might be working with a new parent partner who's trying to help a mother from Jamaica explain to her attorney the difference in her parenting style, so that he can make a more successful presentation to the court. So I sometimes feel like, you know, I'm personally representing 5,000, you know, different families when in my role as director. But Dean really summed up typically what a courtroom day looks like. The other piece of it for my social worker investigators or my parent partners is that, you know, they are actually meeting the families over at the courthouse. They're doing the initial detention interview and the paperwork that the court requires. And they're collaborating with the attorney who's going to be assigned on the case to work with the family. I mean, as you can imagine, on that first date, there's a lot of emotions. People are very emotionally overwrought. And sometimes it really helps to have somebody who's been through this process, the parent partners, you know, talking to them, explaining to them what's going on and what they can expect. I think one of the pluses during this pandemic is that we've had the opportunity to speak to parents days in advance, because typically we would have been meeting them on the very day that they were having their court hearing, and it would be out in public in, you know, lobbies, not confidential. And so it always, I was always shocked at how people would just go ahead, you know, with the interviews with their clients, with everybody around, and everybody, you know, would kind of act like they weren't hearing what was happening. So that has been a real benefit, having the few, like, I think we have like 2 or 3 days now ahead of time. And I understand that that won't remain, but I can guarantee you Ladle will not be going back to talking to parents out in the lobbies anymore like that.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Anyone else want to speak to your day-to-day?
I mean, I can. I'll be very brief. I'll speak a little bit about just the role of the field faculty. I mean, a lot of my day is around, and what so many of the panelists said is many of my day is around meetings, having meetings with the faculty, student meetings. I'm also some of the faculty advisor for several of the student committees. I'm also one of the faculty advisors of the Bruin Shelter Homeless Program that was developed by 2 engineering students. And during the pandemic, we provide med case management services. So med students and social work students collaborate together and work with students who are housing insecure or homeless or at risk of being homeless and going to college. And so we help them or support them in removing obstacles and barriers that could get in the way of them being secure, housing secure. And one of the things which research supports, if your basic needs aren't met, like housing, then it is very challenging and difficult to really focus on your academics. And so participate in meetings, also provide training. I've worked collaboratively with the med school and provided just social work training, working with Dcfs and providing training. It's just training, education, a lot of problem solving meetings. That was pre-pandemic. During the pandemic, everything moved over to Zoom. This was our first year, 2020, 2021. No one has met any of the students, but in little Zoom squares. So that has felt not natural and a little bit challenging as far as connecting with students. And then also teaching on the Zoom platform. And curriculum planning, I mean, I enjoy all the work that we do. And I'll just leave it at that. And then the wind down. Well, I have 2 kids, 6 and 8 years old. So oftentimes it's playing, I think what Stacy had mentioned, playing soccer with them. You either leave the Zoom or leave the computer. It's within 2 to 3 minutes, my mind is taken away because kids want to play, or they want to walk our dog, or they want to go to the park. So it's been, although sometimes challenging, working, and they're going to school at home. So being the teacher, student dean, launch lady, all of that, and trying to get my work done. But when we were able to, and also being the disciplinary one as well, and for the school aspect. And so after the day is over, we're able to spend family time. And then for me, once they're asleep, I usually work out or read or listen to music or watch sports, which is something I love to do.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Anyone else? The day-to-day. Okay. Any questions from the students? Gonna give it a second in the chat just in case. Okay. So I'm going to combine this question. Tell us about any misconceptions that people might have about the work that you do. Or maybe like what you would change or do over again on your path. So misconceptions or change from your path.
I can go first again. Misconceptions, we're baby snatchers. Every parent's terrible and is beating and abusing and wants to do damage to their kids. We get paid for each kid that we take. And having foster care, get paid for each client that we have an open case with. So those are some big misconceptions. It's drastically different than what people perceive. It's more than just a Netflix documentary, our department. And then what would I do differently? I definitely see my macro side coming out. I wish I had kind of known how to anticipate just some of the things that I'd like to get into. And I would have loved to have done both a master's in public policy as well as social welfare. I'm big into policy, advocacy, social justice, and I think it would have just given me a different skill set in terms of as I kind of move more towards the macro side of our department and county, just kind of having that background and that foundation. Would have been nice. Not to say I can't still do it or can't develop those skill sets, but that's just something that I've always kind of thought about the last couple of years is adding that on.
Awesome. Thank you. Anyone else?
Just to echo, I guess the last order, but what Danielle said about, I think, the media portrayal of child welfare, the different print journalism and other that, you know, paints perhaps the system in a different light. I think I am so passionate about every person who's on the screen here. And I think just the idea that this is our community. We all live in this community. These are our neighbors. These are our friends, our family. And we are all here supporting each other and sort of coming at it with that perspective. I think the media often sensationalizes things as well as puts the child welfare system, DCFS, the attorneys, the workers, the physicians in in a position in which it can be troubling in the families as well. And just to also recognize, I think, the intergenerational nature of the trauma that we're experiencing, and that in many of the kids that I'm seeing, the parents who have the substantiated allegations of neglect also went through the system and also had some really tough times. And I think just being supportive, and I'm constantly humbled by the resilience of the families that we work with and the strengths that they have, and really honing in on those strengths, I think, is so important. And the other part of the question was about what I would change about my path. I think I would settle down a little bit. I think there was times along the path where it was like, okay, I got to get to this point or that point. And I think just like being much more comfortable with the day-to-day journey, and knowing that the path is curvy, and that's the best part of the path, is that it doesn't have a destination.
Awesome. Thank you. Maybe Rachel, Sophie, Dean, Michelle.
I can go. I think I went after Stacy last time. It's easier to stay in the same order, maybe. In terms of misconceptions, people think, like, the common response when I say I'm a psychologist is, oh, what am I thinking? Can you read my mind? They'll tell me about a dream and ask me to like tell them what it means. It's not my training. And people think that I always just want to sit around and, when I'm not at work, talk about like feelings and emotions, and that I'm like always secretly psychoanalyzing people, and none of those things are true. And in terms of what I wish I would have known, there's nothing I would, so let me answer this first. There's nothing I would change. I can't think, kind of to Stacy's point, I think I don't really believe in regret. I think we learn from all of our experiences, and I guess I wish I would have appreciated the process or trusted the process, more, rather than change anything about it. So kind of that like slowing down aspect, and just like, that's something I think I've gained over time and with experience, that just trust, and trusting that things will lead me to where they're supposed to lead me, and it's all going to be fine. But when you're in the middle of like grad school, and everyone, there's always the rush and the race to the next thing and the next thing, it feels easy to forget that, or to lose sight of that. And the one thing I wish I had known sooner, and we kind of touched on this earlier, and I was so grateful for the question, is about compassion fatigue. I had to feel it before I knew how to name it. And I think that's become something I do a lot of. And as a supervisor, really make it an intention of mine to educate people about that as early as possible. Because if you know what it is, you won't mistake it for like, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't be in this field, or, wow, am I having some sort of breakdown myself? Like, it can feel really disorienting if you don't know what it is, but once you have a name for it, you can figure out what to do about it. So I wish I'd known about that sooner.
I was just going to say that obviously a common misconception is that we're not really attorneys, that, like we're in training or something like that, because, and I think the other thing, early on in my career, I lacked confidence. If that, I lacked confidence. I didn't really think that, I didn't think about doing different things in my field because I lacked that confidence. And that would, of course, I would change that now if I could. But now I kind of just jump into everything. I touch a little policy, I, do a little advocacy, I do counseling, I do, so I really, really like that. I realize that you don't have to just be in one little box. The other thing I would say too about misperception, we are part of the system. We, as much as we're fighting and pushing back, I try to impress upon my attorneys and the social workers and our parent partners, look, we are part of the system. So when the parents say, hey, they don't trust us or whatever, we have to earn that. We have to show them that we care and that we want to make a difference and that we want to fight for their families. I don't think that that's just a given. And even though we are championing their causes and trying to get their families back together, that we are part of this. And that if we want it to be different, we have to be different.
Thank you, Rachel. Anyone else want to speak to misconceptions about the career or anything you might change or do over again on your path?
I want to say, so because I get this a lot, especially amongst the graduate students over the years, is that how could you teach without having a PhD? Or do you know as much as the PhD faculty, which is called Senate faculty? And, just a lot of questioning about my experience or my knowledge or the information in teaching or well, mainly teaching. So and just one experience this past year is that I didn't know an LCSW can teach a theory class. So some of the misconceptions is that, especially in a research university, that classes are only taught by PhD faculty. So I want to invite all of you that it's not necessarily the case in fields like social work, education, and I believe maybe public health, that, having a master's with experience, you're able to also teach and really provide a lot of the practical components to our field. And so, really bring research to life with some of the lived experiences or some of the community involvement that is also a part of my job. As far as my career path, so my career path was not what I had thought. I never thought I would be an educator, as I mentioned before, but I would not change anything about where I'm at and the job that I do. I really enjoy teaching. I also enjoy collaborating with various community agencies and providing training, or just being part of strategic planning with some of the inequalities, specifically, and some of the systemic inequities and inequalities that still confront us today. That was really highlighted during the pandemic with a lot of the inequities and inequalities. I think the pandemic really, if we weren't aware of it, it was in our face. And so I really enjoy getting to meet or work with students and being able to support them in their career journey. As Danielle said, I'm so happy for her career, but just to see the students thrive and do well. Not students, because Danielle hasn't been a student for a long time, but to see students and that I was a part of their career journey really like speaks a lot and really validates the work that I do. And then just really quickly, Dean, before you probably go on, but just really quickly, I also just want to say I never have left practice, although I'm teaching. So part of my career as a social worker in medical social work, I've also worked in rape treatment clinic. I've also done various other kinds of jobs just to really support my passion of wanting to support children and families in that aspect, and in the medical profession. Sometimes the only voice in that medical room that is speaking with what the family needs is oftentimes the social worker. And so whatever you all, so the last thing I want to say is whatever you all try to do or want to do, just know if you're following your passion, you're not in the wrong path.
That's right. Thank you, Michelle. Anyone else want to speak to this question?
I touched a little bit on the misconception of kind of our work as lawyers, and Rachel reiterated as well. We're attorneys. I don't want to get into that too much because we've kind of talked about it. And the other thing that is a constant misconception or misperception that I think has been hammered home a lot, probably in this program, and especially in the last hour and a half, but really can't be repeated enough, is we're working with families, and they're just like our families in lots of ways, and maybe in those rare exceptions, something really, really tragic happened, and we approach that in a unique sense. But in the end, if you look at it through a lens of humanity, if you look at it through a lens of family, it really does change the way you go about your work. I remember having a conversation with a relative who just did not understand the defaults of reunification. And they really thought that the child welfare system was about creating new families that were, in their lens, better families and had more resources. And they said, I just don't understand how, with the drugs and the alcohol, how that's good. And it just was one of those things where you're like, what are you not seeing in how it's not necessarily that child welfare system involved families are different, but that they're seen differently. And it's so important to just really hammer that home. I think that I'm always surprised at how many people I meet and come across who just don't understand the idea that removal is trauma, even when you weigh the factors. And it is the decision that you're going to represent to the court in that unique situation with that unique child that you represent and their unique circumstances. It's not a win. It's just a mitigated loss, because removal in itself is traumatic, and you have to balance all of that. And so it's so important to keep that in mind, no matter what role you have, as a counselor, as a social worker, as an attorney, as a bench officer, as a teacher. That's the lens that I think we constantly in this field have to set and reset and be reminded of, and lose focusing on that. I mean, that's when you probably need to take a vacation.
That's right, Dean. Okay. Anybody else want to address this question before we go to student questions?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to run to a child and family team meeting, actually, with a social work team and a family. I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and I welcome all outreach. And I think mentorship is huge. And honestly, also, it's just such a pleasure to be on this panel with all of you here today. And I'll probably also reach out for some professional collaborations too. And I hope to hear from the students on. So thank you guys all. I'm so sorry I have to run a little bit early.
Thank you, Stacy. Appreciate you so much.
Here.
Give Dr. Barron a little cheer and thank her for being with us. And then we will carry on with the rest of our discussion with our remaining panelists. Thank you. Any questions from the students? Lots of thanks for Dr. Barron. Any questions from the students? This is your chance to ask people who do this type of work. So any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Seeing none at this moment, I am going to insert a surprise question for our panel, because I think it's something I should have put in the notes and failed to do so. But briefly, can perhaps everyone on the panel just share maybe how the racial justice resurgence and movement has really come up in your work during this time, and how you see, yourself playing a part in that work. I think it's really been a critical part of our summer academy, and a lot of students have raised, issues around equity in office hours, and as we've talked throughout the course. And so, from our panelists, can you give some insight on how these issues are coming up in your work, briefly? We could start maybe with Sophie. Let's start with Sophie.
Sure. It's always been a topic of conversation in my clinical work, particular working with a lot of youth of color. And I will say that it's coming up more because I think it's all of what's happening is bringing up a lot of racial trauma. You know, racism is not new, but everything that has come up in this last year and how forefront it's been in the media, I think has been really triggering for folks. And it's really inspired a lot of new conversations around it. So in my clinical practice, it's something that definitely comes up a lot. My job at UCLA, you know, in a lot of ways, we have the mic because we're putting together the content that goes into trainings that goes out to all of LA County. So we've certainly been very intentional about including elements in all of our trainings related to equity, anti-racism, putting out content related to anti-racism on our Learning Center. That was the website that I put in the chat earlier. And, you know, I certainly have seen an influx of requests for different kinds of projects related to racial equity, one of which I'm working on with Taylor soon, which is exploring the experience of Black youth in foster care to try to understand how we can support resource parents more so that Black youth get adopted more. We know that they're overrepresented in the child welfare system, and we want to understand how to just more about their experiences and how to make sure that they get placed with families that are supportive and able to meet their needs. And I don't know that that project would have come about, you know, in the same way, in the same fashion, you know, so I think it had a lot to do with this time.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Anyone else want to address this prize question that I rudely threw into this mix?
Obviously, it's, you know, been something that's always been an issue in our work. I think that the thing that's different now, I mean, you know, we always talked about it, you know, within our organization and whatever, but now you're hearing people talk about it in areas that I never thought I'd hear it. You know, I sit on a lot of different committees and go to a lot of different meetings, and, you know, I've been at Dcfs meetings where they're actually, you know, talking about it and talking about making some type, you know, making changes, which is very, very encouraging. Obviously, because to acknowledge it is the first step, you know. I also see it, you know, in how I'm working with my staff and with my attorneys, that this is at this point in my career, in my life, I'm not gonna tolerate it anymore. I'm not gonna ignore it anymore. I'm not gonna make people feel more comfortable anymore by ignoring it. And so I'm asking them, you know, to join in that by raising issues, by asking the gatekeepers, so to speak, to face their own biases, you know, talking out loud about the family that has their Cosmopolitan at the end of the day, and the young man who goes into his garage and, you know, hits a blunt, you know. We need to talk about that, you know. I think also this, and this is not my term, but this moral construction of poverty, you know, that Professor Bridges talks about from Berkeley. You know, people the difference to me in the treatment of families is because we're making judgments about people, you know, about how they conduct themselves, and it's based on race, it's based on poverty, economics. It's all of these different factors that don't have anything to do with what we say it is, child safety. So for me, now it's like it's the line in the sand. You know, we're not going to ignore it anymore. We're going to address it, and we're going to call the systems on it.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I'm so happy that you could speak to that because you've been such a leader in these issues and have just done so much even in the last year that I've had the pleasure of working with you, and like it's shifting things so quickly, and I really just want to thank you for your leadership and for helping us all push those boundaries. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak to the equity issues that are coming up in your work and maybe what your organizations are doing about them?
I can speak to it. I think I bring it in the classroom, being a Black woman. And I think what has happened over the last year is it really polarized the, I guess, biases, stereotypes of what groups, well, I'll just say what groups of people feel or how they feel or how it's portrayed in the media of either youth of color, families of color, Black families, and then just other various, and I'm going to speak to Black families, but just Black families and how they're portrayed. But I also feel like in some ways that just being, I just feel some ways that the conversations in the classroom that I've had, but also the conversations amongst faculty, I feel like sometimes being a part of that, being a part of the, marginalized group, I just feel like sometimes in those conversations we're tokenized. And I don't think that it's intentional, but I just think it just happens just, I actually don't really have an explanation for it, but I just feel like it just happens. But, and I'm only saying this just so that, as we are tackling these complex and complicated conversations about racial justice, and as we all saw it last year, and we continue to see it just in various different spaces, I think that we have to really look at, at ourselves just to really get a understanding of how some of these narratives continually to have an impact in the work that we do. And oftentimes it's not intentional, but it's the narrative that we move forward or that we bring forward. And the last thing I want to say, although some of the, we've moved along and having conversations, one of the things that I feel like is just still invisible is just the Black women that are dying on a day-to-day basis. And that we don't really have space or conversations enough about that, as well as the trans community and some of the violence that continues. So I feel like, although on one end, we are tackling an area that we need to, but I think it's at the cost of other groups of people that are left out.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's so well put, much appreciated. And especially the connection around the health of Black women and their families. The two are more interrelated than I think we'd often like to admit. So really appreciate you raising that. Any other comments on equity before we do some closing thoughts?
I'll chime in a little bit. What the county is trying to initiate is we do have I don't know if we can call it a program, but a group, ERDD, Eliminating Racial Disproportionality in our system. I think we are recognizing more and more and having conversations about the disproportionality of Black kids in our system and also Native Americans to a certain, to another degree. And how do we start to address that? What's happening? What are we experiencing? What is a Black family experiencing with our system, and what are we not understanding that ends up leading to those kids being detained at a higher rate? And how do we open the forum to start having those conversations, to explore biases, to explore what people's belief systems come to this table, and how does that impact the decisions when they walk into a house of a Black family? And so the county's been really trying to push. I know at Van Nuys, at my previous office, we had monthly meetings where we would just open the space for conversation. We did during Black History Month, did a whole series for 4 weeks addressing different topics of the Black experience in America and having some deep, meaningful conversations. And I think that each office individually is starting to really open up the conversation of what's happening. What don't we understand? What do we need to know? As we go to these investigations or better understand the culture behind Black families. The other thing too is I know that the county's trying to hire more cultural brokers so that there's an advocate in the room to be an ally to our families. Not every office has, so it's a work in progress. And then I know in SPA 2, which is like the San Fernando, Santa Clarita, West San Fernando Valley area, we have had annual symposiums where we have different guest speakers come and highlight different topics and really kind of challenge our existing belief systems and to kind of push us to evaluate our practice. So I know those things, and I know the director is trying to really highlight this issue and not figure out ways and how do we work collaboratively to mitigate some of the side effects.
Thank you so much, Danielle. So certainly a lot of efforts going on. I'm sure everyone will say that we wish we could all do so much more, particularly where it impacts Black families, families of color, folks experiencing poverty. And this is why we need all of you. And we hope that today's panel has really highlighted some of the ways that you can get involved in this work. And so before we, close today, would love to hear any parting thoughts from our panelists on, maybe any advice for students who don't know what they want to do yet, or any other, words of wisdom you'd like to share in closing before we, conclude today's session. Anybody want to share parting words of wisdom?
I'll start for the last time today. I'd say just be compassionate with yourself first. Let your values drive the direction you want to take and what you want to achieve. There's a big push these days, and I think there's a lot of merit to really knowing what your why statement is. Like, what motivates you, what drives you, and to find a career path that aligns with that value system and that why statement that you have, so that you're doing something that you will be passionate and dedicated to, and you're less likely to experience burnout if you're really sticking and letting your values drive your career path. Be flexible with yourself and take risks. I think that none of us really kind of necessarily 100% know our paths, but we've all at some point taken a risk, like switching a position, going back to school, or just different avenues. And you just never know where one thing might lead you or who you might come across. And then also for those who are questioning, I would just say reach out to people in different fields, have those conversations and get to know better what that field would entail. And I will say that something for me with social work, because I was debating between master's in education versus social welfare, is that I liked the idea of having more options. Being able to go from one thing to another and switch into different aspects of social work. And so for me, that's what was a good fit. But for others, it might be something different, but it definitely helped to be able to talk to people in those different fields and internships to see if it's really what was going to be good for me. And there's times I question it, even to this day. You will never stop questioning, should I have done something else? Because there's just some days that you're just like, what am I doing? But then you ground yourself, you take care of yourself, and you come back to it, because I truly believe for myself that my value system aligns with a lot of what social work is. And as far as the questions, Taylor, anyone can reach out to me. I'm happy to have these conversations and just kind of dive into it deeper. I know we're limited time in this space, but I'll put my email in the chat. And as far as internships, the only way, unfortunately, at DCFS you can be an intern, it has to be through an MSW program or a BSW program.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you for being with us. Any other closing thoughts? Sophie?
Sure. I think that the main two that come to mind is, I kind of said this earlier in terms of trusting the process, but, I think especially as it relates to choosing your life path, sometimes there's the pressure to know and to come to a decision, and we have a sense of urgency on it. And I think just make the next decision and then the next decision, and don't feel like you have to have it all planned out, because I couldn't have planned it out if I tried. So just stay open, be open to course correcting if more information becomes available to you that leads you down a different path. And, like Danielle said, let your values and your passions guide you, right? Look for the yes answers and things and just keep following those. And I also would just say, really, truly build relationships, build your networks, identify mentors, talk to people. It's helpful as a professional skill, but it's also just helpful as, support system and, just building community in the work that we do, because we are doing work that is for the community. You are all welcome to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat. We don't have any internship opportunities. And I think I've answered all the questions. So thank you for having me again, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Sophie. Dean?
I think that there's words of wisdom. A lot of people have kind of covered it. I think one thing to really think about is that there is a why for why you're enrolled in the Summer Child Welfare Academy, and keep that in mind as you make decisions moving forward. It's easy to be inundated with the idea of what does just one step forward mean for me versus 3 steps. It's easy to be upside down as you look at your next steps. And I think if you take a moment right now and write down the why you're in the Summer Child Welfare Academy, that might be handy information later on when you're faced with certain decisions. I think the other thing is that I'm so impressed you're in the Summer Child Welfare Academy right now. I wasn't in this, and you're already doing really well. You're already making strides just by virtue of tuning in, sitting in on this panel and the sessions prior to this. You're already gathering information and you're doing a great job. And I'm looking at all these names below this Zoom, and all of you have a path forward. Maybe it's in child welfare, maybe it's not, but just by virtue of being here, something's going right. And keep that in mind. You're doing fine. And it's so easy to have imposter syndrome or to be just totally overwhelmed by decisions. This is normal. I think someone spoke earlier, Stacy, about turning off tech because there's so many societal influences and pressure that comes with mindlessly scrolling other people's lives and stuff. The key right now is to just make sure that you're taking your own temperature with where you want to go. Sometimes turn on the blinders, turn off the phone, and just know that right now, today, you're doing a really good job. And you're here, and future self will tell you this was a good decision, and you're further ahead than you know it in terms of your own personal and professional progress. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Dean. Well put. Thank you so much. Michelle?
I was going to say, I agree with what everyone said, but I want to say and really emphasize, you matter. Your decision matters no matter what family, significant others. I know when I was entering social work, oftentimes they're like, really, what is that? What do you do? What is social work? And I'm still asked that on the social work aspect side. And then also along, just embrace your journey, no matter if there's twists and turns, no matter if maybe you thought you were going to do one thing and it takes you to another. It opens up doors. Just let it all happen. And what I really believe in is that organically you're where you're supposed to be. And the decision will come to you when you're not looking and leaning into others to help you make that decision. But if you look inside, you have what it takes to make the decision as far as your career path, and that will never fail you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Rachel, close us out, my
Okay.
friend.
Yes. So do what makes you happy. If you're just doing this work for your parents or for whomever, or for whatever reasons you're doing it, it's not going to work. Be happy. You got to hold on to your humanity, challenge yourself, and don't be afraid of change. I do have internships, so holler at me. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd like to introduce you to this world. It's crazy. Dean will tell you. The last thing I wanted to say is, look, this is hard work. It's going to make you super, super tired, but it is so gratifying. It is working with these families, and I can't even I get chills even now. I've been doing this forever, and I'm still, excited about it. So come on and check us out. Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Let's give our panel a huge round of applause and many, 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 many thanks for being with us today. It was so great to hear from you, hear your inspiration, hear your own paths. It sounds like a lot of students are, asking for contact info. If the panelists are open to that, please feel free to put it in the chat if you haven't already. And, so many of you talked about how gratifying this work is. And I just want to say that, so much of what makes the work so gratifying are the relationships that we all have with one another in doing this work. And to that end, thank you so much for, being a part of UCLA Pritzker Center's Summer Child Welfare Academy. We're so grateful to all of our panelists, and we really, really appreciate you joining us today. With that, I will bid our panelists adieu, and then I will give some closing comments to our students. But thank you to the panelists for being with us today.